Good morning. This is Jenna Suhita on Radio Free Hillsdale 101.7 FM. We're talking with Senator Mike Shirkey, a member of the Michigan State Senate and former member of the Michigan House of Representatives. First elected to the Senate in 2014, Senator Shirkey's district covers all of Branch, Hillsdale, and Jackson counties, and we are very glad to have him with us today. Senator, good morning.
Good morning, Jenna. Nice to be with you.
Thank you, Senator. There was a non-discrimination ordinance passed in Jackson earlier this month, and it's set to go into effect in another week or so. What was that ordinance about?
Jenna, I'm glad you asked. It's a little bit of a disturbing trend that continues to creep across our nation, our state, and our nation. First, before we get started, though, I want to share with you that any conversation on this topic needs to be sprinkled heavily with love, because it tends to get pretty divided and pretty divisive immediately. But the non-discrimination ordinance that Jackson City Council passed, I call it, to be perfectly blunt, I call it government-sanctioned discrimination ordinance, because it allows people to make claims that are unsubstantiated, that are then part of public record, that are then evaluated by non-trained personnel, and the ordinance itself is full of words like perceived and perception. So let me give you an example. I own a manufacturing company in Jackson and an engineering company, and if you and another person came in to fill out an application for a job, and I chose the other person, not knowing anything about your personal life, but if you thought I knew about your personal life, if you thought I thought you were lesbian, for instance, you could make a claim that I didn't hire you because of that, when in reality is I may not even have known it. And then that begins a process of assessment by a city attorney. Then it could go to a specially assigned commission that does a further investigation. All of this, based on what somebody thought I knew or didn't know. And so it really is an infringement on all of our rights. Nobody is for discrimination. I mean, let's put that out there on the table here, and that nobody is for discrimination. But these kinds of ordinances always lead to discrimination on the other direction. And, the famous examples of the cake bakers and the florists, those are not stories. Those are not myths. They're real. And that's why I tend to label it as government-sanctioned discrimination.
So, Senator, how drastic of an impact would this ordinance have on Jackson County, either passing or not, with this ordinance?
Well, I gave you an example of employment just now, and somebody makes a claim against a business, and even if that claim is later proven to be false, the scar that's associated with that is, could be deep. And so I just think that, there's the danger here is creating an environment where people won't want to invest because of fear of being falsely accused of things. And most recently, Jenna, I'm not going to disclose the family, but there's a young professional family that I spoke to, and this was in the Jackson area, who said because of the NDO, they think that portends the direction of the city, and they think that's not a city where they want to live, and therefore they're thinking about moving out of the city. So the irony here is some certain major employers think it's necessary to pass such ordinances to be, air quotes, friendly to a full, diverse population, when in reality a bigger part of the population is saying that that's not what we want our community to be based on. So, again, there's no credible evidence to demonstrate that there's been discrimination. This is all based on a movement of an agenda. It's not an agenda of accepting behaviors that, frankly, are not correct.
Right. So, Senator, you've mentioned a lot of examples of more informal resistance, but there is also a more official petition to block this ordinance. Are these petitioners trying to stop or simply to stall the ordinance?
Neither one of those. The bylaws of the city council allow ordinances to have a referendum vote of the voters of the registered voters of the city if they get enough signatures. And the signature hurdle is 10% of the previous mayoral race. So the petitioners want to put the issue of the ordinance on a ballot, and they have to collect 350 or so signatures of registered voters in Jackson. And as long as the language of the petition is clear and accurate, the council must then put it on a ballot. So now the decision of whether we have a non-discrimination ordinance in Jackson would no longer be in the hands of the council, but it would be in the hands of the voters.
This is Jenna Suhitz on Radio Free Hillsdale 101.7 FM. We're talking to Senator Mike Shirkey about the Jackson Nondiscrimination Ordinance. Senator, can you tell us mainly who is the driving force behind this petition attempt?
Well, it's the LGBTQ community who's primarily behind it. The only entities that I'm aware of outside of what I just said are, and they're kind of prominent in the Jackson area, are Henry Ford Allegiance Health, the hospital system, and Consumers Energy. I don't know why they chose to put a place marker on this. I think it's...
But Senator, what about primarily the people petitioning the ordinance? Is this mostly churches or is this other organizations?
I don't think it's mostly churches, although I would acknowledge that because of efficiency, most of the signatures were gathered at churches. But, there were the second public city council meeting when they had to move it to the Michigan Theater. There were, a few hundred people there in opposition, and then they weren't all folks necessarily talking on behalf of their churches. This is something that they feel themselves viscerally.
This ordinance has been in the works for a long time, but it's due to go into effect on March 9th. That's Thursday of next week. Of course, that's only if the petition fails. If it does fail, will these petitioners have any recourse or any chance of repealing the ordinance?
Well, the only recourse would be to elect in another set of commissioners that would, by commission vote, repeal the ordinance. They will have exhausted their citizens' recourse.
This is Jenna Suhitz on Radio Free Hillsdale 101.7 FM. We're talking to Senator Mike Shirkey we're going to talk about now actually the Call and Go Now taxi service that closed recently, owned by Charles Ferguson. Senator, what can you tell us about the legislation that caused his business to suffer?
Well, Jenna, I'm not going to let you get away with saying that the legislation caused his business to suffer. And Mr. Ferguson has been providing a great service in the greater Hillsdale area for a while now, and I don't want to in any way disparage him. But the legislation made it clearer that taxi services and transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft and so forth have a responsibility to have the same kinds of liability coverage for driving that you and I have when we want to drive a vehicle and register a vehicle in Michigan. And also, they have to acknowledge that they're a commercial entity, not just a private driver. And so the legislation highlighted that need, but in reality, Mr. Ferguson, I think, would agree if he were with us on the phone that he was probably operating on his personal liability insurance policy and then doing a commercial enterprise. And that's not, I think he would agree that that's probably not right. And so the legislation highlighted it, but it didn't cause the problem. Michigan's law that we passed last year in this environment is one of the most favorable, most progressive, and most accommodating to enhance the ability for these kinds of new technology services to grow and thrive in Michigan. And so I think Mr. Ferguson is an unfortunate, it's an unfortunate unintended consequence, but, like I said, I think he would understand and agree that he may not have been driving completely properly covered.
But overall, you would say, Senator, that this legislation supports companies such as Uber and Lyft?
Oh, yeah. No question about it. And it also supports creative technologies to apply to taxi cabs, too. It was broadly supported by all the currently existing taxi companies, limousine companies, transportation companies, and by the new technology companies like Uber and Lyft. It was almost 2 years in the making, and there's been reviews across the nation that Michigan's laws are some of the best now to promote the application of this kind of technology. So I think overall it was the right thing to do. I enthusiastically supported it, but Mr. Ferguson's example is unfortunate, and like I said, he's provided wonderful support and services, but maybe not completely properly covered.
For our listeners, if you're interested, you can find more online at senatormikeshirkey.com or on Facebook at Senator Mike Shirkey. Senator, thank you.
You're welcome, Jenna.
You
have a good day, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.